So here we are. Here's our home page. So here's our app.js. So before app.js was where all the logic was, right? So it was doing doing everything here. Now our app.js is using React Router. We're saying, hey, now we have a couple of pages. And we needed that for a few reasons. One, we needed to have an authenticated page. It was an unauthenticated page. But we also needed a route called callback that Auth0 uses to send to our app. Because what happens there is as soon as we initiate that login process, we're going up to OAuth servers, we're on OAuth stuff, we might go to Google, might go to GitHub, we're doing a whole bunch of stuff. We need some place for their stuff to come back to. We're saying, hey, even though we're starting in our app in localhost 3000, we're going someplace else. What's that callback URL? What is sending us back data? So we had to add a new page on our app called callback. And all this is doing, this is just some place to catch the data coming back from the authentication servers. Nothing too crazy. And
you said that's another component that we have?
yeah.
No, it's a render.
Yep. And really, that component is just a loading screen.
Oh.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like it's doing nothing crazy. All the craziness from the React Router stuff and the callback is happening right here. We're saying, hey, handle the authentication, which is doing this logic right here, and then display that loading screen. That's all that's doing, Chris.
Is there a significant difference between component and render?
Render just takes a function, and component takes a component. So like here, like whenever we hit the home, what, Jason?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was.
Go. Oh yeah, if you have an answer for that.
So component. So imagine if in render all you did was write a function that returns a component with JSX tags, like he does. Like take out that call to handle authentication there, and then just return, and then he calls the function like that. So that is exactly what component does for you. Is that you just give it not the instantiated component, which is when you call it with the brackets as a JSX tag. That's when you just say, and then pass the props along. So that, and then what he had there before, where it just said component equals homepage, all right, exactly equivalent.
What are props?
Props are any props that the router would be passing along for any reason.
Like match.
It's those the router injects itself, but there's ways that other props could get passed along down the chain from above if your router had things above it, which in this case it doesn't. But yeah, any props that would need to get passed through. So that's the difference between them. Is render says give me a function that returns what you want me to render. Component says I'll do the default thing if you just give me a name of a component, which in most cases is that's what you want. Is the simplest thing. That make sense?
Did that props means one?
That is the spread operator in JavaScript. That just says create a new object with all the keys and values of this object. It does a lot more than that, but that's what it's doing.
The dot.
Yeah, spread operator.
So that's like saying prop 1 equals curly braces prop 1 value. Prop 2 equals
Yeah.
curly braces prop 2 value.
There's a little bit of syntax which we're going to make
Shorthand.
make our lives a little bit easier. So I've added some routes here. And inside of the callback, we see that it is handling authentication, which we see is calling a function that's coming from this thing called auth. So if we think back to our object-oriented ideas and what's going on there, we know that we want to use objects to encapsulate data and kind of abstract it away from everything else. So we've put all of our authentication logic inside of one class and called it auth. That way, anytime we want to use these auth tools, we just import this auth class and new up a new instance of it, like we're doing on line 12. So that way, anytime we need to like log in, log out, check to see if someone's authenticated, we're going through this new class. That way, all of our logic is in one place.
Is the auth instance always on the top level of your app?
It should be. I mean, that's right. It doesn't have to be, but it can be anywhere. I put it up there.
The
But it's usually
Auth0 tutorial
global.
puts it up there.
Yeah, like that's just kind of like, that's a place to put it.
But it's usually global.
Usually global to that component.
Yeah, so this isn't global, but by putting it here, and then by, see that handle authentication, and then props, see how it takes the props as an argument? I'm fairly certain that what that's going to do is insert auth into the props. Am I right?
It might.
So then any authenticated components have access to the auth function? I could be wrong, that might get handled a different way.
It might. That's not how they did it for the baseline integration. But that's
Scroll down. The last
Oh,
line
auth
of
was
code.
out.
Mhm.
That what I just said may or may not be happening there.
So what that props was doing, it may or may not be happening, but it's looking at the URL, not the URL, the current state, and seeing if there's those things in there, either access token, ID token, or error, and then it's handling the authentication.
It's not doing what I said because I can see right there that it's not doing it.
Yeah, it's just saying, hey, here's the authentication. I'm going to actually receive what was tossed back to me. Then I'm going to do something with it if it matches what I'm looking for. So what is it? What is that doing? What does that catching look like? Let's check it out. So this is the auth class, and like Jason said earlier, there's a conveniently an Auth0 package that does most of the magic for us. So everything that's inside of this file, you can tell it's a little lengthy, but it's not too crazy. Everything inside of this is just managing whether a user is logged in or not. Like I said earlier, this is going to be the hardest stuff, and it's really not too crazy. Because at its core, if you check out the auth and kind of look into it, what it's doing, it's setting a logged in session. It's just storing a token inside of local storage. So all of this is so at the end of the day, in local storage, we have a token that is a JWT that we can pass back and forth with anything that we allow it with.
Every time the user logs into your app, is the access token, ID token, and are those going to be the same every time?
They'll be new every time.
The access token will be new.
Everything should be new. Because it's a new session every time that you log in.
So if you store their ID token in your user database,
So you're
Is
not
that-
storing the token side of the
ID
database.
token might do the same.
Might
I
it?
think it's the unique ID for Auth0 for that user.
Okay. I'm not going to say you're wrong, but that's probably might be a thing.
The access token would be,
Yeah.
because you'd say like, hey, this user wants to log in with this access token. That access token is going to have a expiration date encoded into it, so it's
Mhm.
going to last for so long. And it's also only going to work for that user.
yeah, 'cause I'm just trying to think how you'd store the ID for that user based on that. And I thought that would be the ID token. So. Might not be. I don't know.
No. Inside of that access token, whenever it's parsed, decrypted, parsed.
Only part
Yeah.
of it's encrypted. It's
What?
got 3 parts,
Yeah.
and only part of it may be encrypted.
Yeah. So it's one of the payload. Inside of that
Yes.
payload, there's a whole bunch of information. Just whatever information there's about the user, and we'll check it out in a little
I'm pretty
bit.
sure the ID token is in the Jude payload.
Yep.
Typically, is the sub.
We get it probably. We'll explore it together.
Yes.
But typically, on the .NET side, whenever we configure it, we're saying, hey, we're expecting JWTs from this issuer. So we're expecting JWTs to come from Auth0. Whenever it parses it out, it gives you a user ID, or a unique identifier for a user, and you're storing that. So yeah, so we're getting some things. coming in, handling it. We are setting the session, which is, like I said, just local storage, and then we're redirecting back to the home page. So this is how we redirect in React and JavaScript, is that we're pushing something onto the history.
That debugging symbol is perfectly on your forehead. It was really funny.
Can you just explain what history is?
Yeah. So history, unless Jason wants to take this one.
So React Router makes available a number of ways for you to do state in the URL. One of them is browser history. That's the default one, and the one in 2018 that we should all be using. There's a couple more like legacy methods of doing it. But that basically is an API that gives you access to the browser's history so that you can add things onto it, which would then change what page you're on, right? If I say like, add onto the history this URL, then I go forward in time, and then the back button now works. So it's like history is like a big chain of like all the pages I've been on. If I add to it, then I'm on a new page, and I can press the back button. Replace does something different than push, and I think it makes it so that the back button works, but it doesn't change the actual history, like in the browser's history or something like that.
What do you
But
mean?
not need to worry.
You don't need to worry about the differences.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
when you like go to see your browsing history in your browser, it's literally like pushing a new page onto that list.
But doesn't the internet, the web page or whatever, do that automatically?
It does when you click around on links. But
Yeah.
nobody's clicking a link here. So how would you add to the history programmatically? This is how.
Yeah.
This is how this JavaScript code is going to change the route that you're looking at. Because the user's not going to click on a, this is the equivalent of clicking on a link component in React Router, but from
Mhm.
code. Because the user's not, there's no link button here for the user to click. This code's happening when they get redirected back from
Mhm.
the authentication
Yeah.
server.
Oh.
Yeah. So let's.
So they've already clicked the login button.
Mhm.
Now we need to do a bunch of things. We look at those routes that we set up, one of them was /callback.
Mhm.
So once we go over, we see the Auth0 screen, we see the Google screen, it sends us back to our app, and the URL then is /callback. From there, all this code that Mark's showing you is going to run, and then once it's resolved, did the user get logged in okay or not? We need to push the user to the right page without them clicking on a link again,
Mhm.
right? So that's why we historyed up replace.
Yeah. Because actually, whenever I click.
That's
this,
why we want to use replace. We want to take the /callback out of the history.
That's right.
We want to replace /callback with home or
Whatever the
or
dashboard is.
create new FUPA
Yeah,
or whatever.
whatever the next step in the authentication
Yeah.
process is. Yeah, so whenever I click this, watch the URL. It's going to start off with localhost 3000. Then it's going to go through the hoops to get the server. We're going to go to OAuth servers. We're going to go to Google servers. And then it's going to come back. For a brief split second, it's going to say /callback. And then it's going to say /home. All programmatic. Yes.
And then if you were to look at your browser history, you wouldn't see the callback in there because the code replaced that with /home. There's that.
Hmm.
There it is,
There's-
callback, and then gone.
Mhm.
/home.
Is it the access token?
That was the access
Yep.
token in the URL.
Which now, because of the code that we just checked out, so over here to our local storage.
Backwards.
We now have our access token, our expires at, and our ID token.
So if you were to clear your local storage, you would log out.
Yep. So if I clear my local
Okay.
storage,
Oh, the ID token and the access token are the same thing. Are they the same thing all the way, or do they just have the same header?
I
If they're not, then that's very crazy.
I think they just have the same header.
Yeah, the one. They're both Jutes. One just has the token in it, and the other one has the rest of the payload.
Which one's the ID token?
Oh wait, you didn't copy.
And yeah, I didn't get the whole thing. It's the access token,
Okay.
and then
So the ID token one.
So that's the header. Oh, they're different now.
yeah.
They just had the same. Whatever the first thing was in the beginning. Is the
Mm-hmm.
same, which makes
And we
sense.
can actually decrypt. We can actually decrypt this using the JWT debugger, which is super useful for seeing what's going on. So I'm going to come over here and grab. Let's grab the ID, the access token first. So we see, hey, here's our header. So it's the little metadata about it. We have the payload, what's actually inside of that. And we see that we have who issued it, so my Auth0 account. We have a sub, which is what we can use as the user ID later. We have who the audience is, so that's kind of like who's allowed to see it. Also have the expiration dates as well as the scope. So the scope is what allows me to see what is to actually request what's going on.
Good question.
Man, on the beat.
So before, when we were talking about the history and kind of how it hides that,
Mhm.
if I was doing for my project, I didn't want to have the navigation bar to be switching from place to place. I would have to insert some type of code like that, so it's just the start button, and then it takes you to the next page, and then you're
Yeah.
not seeing that navigation bar on top. Is that what I would?
You would have to, so if you wanted to go to the next component without changing the URL, that would probably be a dot replace, I would imagine.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be, but so that
Yeah.
because the pages are linked already, I just don't need to have because I don't want people navigating back like away from where they are at that point. So anyway.
Yeah, we can look at that's going to be some manipulation of history to kind of see what you want to do, and then on those pages you can even like check a state, kind of like build up a state going.
Yeah,
'Cause it
this
sounds
would
like
be- you're not whatever navigation you're talking about. You're gonna not use React Router for that. You're gonna use state
Yeah,
and use that. Let state internally decide what.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing with React Router is routing the URL in the address bar
Mhm.
to some state in your app.
Yeah.
If you're not wanting to use that, then just use state in React.
Yes.
And then so the second one is you mentioned that JWT was the modern version because when the tokens were passed around, that signature you could verify that it hasn't been manipulated, right?
Mhm.
So this seems kind of like if you could just grab a token and kind of
Yeah, like they're not
unencrypt it.
secure because you can always crack it open, but I
Well,
can't verify it if
The
we keep on
payload
going.
could be encrypted data because the payload could be anything. So you could put encrypted data in the payload. But the way Jute works is you've got a header that says, this is what kind of Jute I am. This is the encryption algorithms I use. Then it has the data. Then it has a signature that is a signed signature based on that data. So if you were to decrypt, if you were to change that data, that signature would no longer be valid. So even though the data is readable, it can't be modified because it would invalidate the signature that's attached to the Jute. But like if you wanted to have that same thing but also have the data be private, you would just encrypt the data before you signed the Jute.
When you were fetching with the headers of bearer
Mhm.
something, is that what the header is?
Yeah, we'll get to that in about 10 minutes whenever I actually start using this token.
Yeah, JWTs or jutes are the standard way to do those kind of tokens nowadays.
Yeah.
Just a quick question, so the on the left, that's the encrypted information?
That's
This
encoded.
this is the token, so it's
It's
encoded. Encoded
It's
is a better word
base-
for it.
It's like base 58 encoded.
So, okay, so just so that's why you can see it on the right.
Because it's just encoded. We're just
It's
taking and
using the
decoding.
format, it's a
Yeah.
formatted way of,
It's like using a decoder ring, and we
Yeah.
already know that there's a standard for that, and we know how to just
so not secure, I
it
guess.
just
it's-
turns it into numbers and letters
Yeah.
instead of all
It's-
this other stuff.
It's not secure unless you actually encode the payload.
It's not secret,
Yeah.
but it's secure. That's
Yes.
the difference. Yeah. It's secure in that if it's changed, it will become invalidated.
Right,
So we know that we know that the messenger did not interfere with the message, but what we're looking at here is not a sealed message. The message can be read by anybody looking at it,
Yeah.
but the signature can verify that this message is as it was originally written, which that's secure but not secret.
No
Mhm.
middleman, right?
Yeah.
What?
You,
No middleman.
No, yeah, well, yeah, no middleman modified this.
yeah.
So this token can travel across the internet, and when I look at it, I can be sure that this token was as it came from the issuer, because it's signed by the issuer. And you can even see there that first key in the payload is short for issuer. That is the issuer of this, and when something does the verification, they'll actually go to the issuer there, the auth0.com, and then there's like a URL where they get the public keys and they do the
Yeah.
cryptographic verification. Well, you don't have to worry about all that, but the point is it uses that signature and that issuer to make sure that that issuer did in fact write that signature, and that signature is the signature for this data.
and that's okay because it's the data that you want protected, well, you also want to make sure that it came from you, but it's
Mhm.
really,
Got it.
the ultimate is your data that you're trying to protect.
Yeah, there's nothing in that payload
Yeah.
that's secret. It's just, is it valid?
That's
That's
really
the
what we
question.
care about. We're not trying to hide stuff here. We're not trying to encrypt anything. We could throw encrypted data in there, but that's a whole nother story. But this is just like I want to verify who you are, and I want to verify that this message that this JWT is in fact valid. That's all this is doing. So let's check out, because we were talking about it earlier, what this ID token is. So this ID token has actually all my data.
Go back.
Hey, Mark, question.
Jason, where are you going to go back to?
I want to see the payload.
Okay.
If I start to scroll past it.
If I would have this token, like if I could copy paste this token to my machine, could I go and into your places to bin?
You could log into my app with this token. You would log in as me as well, yes.
But there'd be nowhere to get it because it's in local storage.
Right. So unless I had something on my machine that would send out my tokens to other people.
Yes. If you were to take that token and put it in your local storage and refresh your page, you would be logged in as him.
Yeah, if I could get to your machine and get your bitcoins on your tokens, then I'll
Yep.
be good, right?
And that in itself is a very common way of hacking and accessing identity. It's the reason now that almost all websites are HTTPS, because now the communication that Mark's browser is going to do with the servers from end to end will be encrypted. If it was not encrypted, anybody on the same network as Mark could see the traffic flowing over the network and read the traffic. Somewhere in that traffic, they're going to be able to find that token and pull that token out, and now they can use it. So that's why anytime you're logging in on a website, especially on a public network, but really in 2018, anytime you're logging in on a website, you should see that HTTPS.
Yep.
There is no excuse for websites that do anything login related to not have HTTPS anymore. The certificates you used to have to pay for them. You don't have to pay for
So
them
it's free.
Yes, we have got open free standards now for issuing those certificates securely. So there's no excuse now for any website to have a login page that's not encrypted. Because that thing that you just described is a real thing and happens when you don't have HTTPS in place. Or when somebody gets physical access to your computer, but there's only so much you can do.
I'll say, yeah,
You were
if-
talking
if-
about like unprotected Wi-Fi's, like
Yes.
in cafes and stuff. and
Exactly that.
Somebody could intercept your tokens.
Yes, that's exactly what happens. Or, the NSA intercepts your tokens as they route through some router somewhere.
Yeah.
When you've got HTTPS, assuming that there's no backdoor into that, which we're not aware of one, but assuming there's no backdoor into that, then your traffic from end to end through every physical hub that your network traffic connects through to get to its destination is encrypted, and only you and the server who's talking it know what's in there.
Is that a VPN?
That's not a VPN.
That's something else.
That's something that's not.
A VPN would also solve that problem. A VPN is more like create this tunnel between here and here, and everything that passes through there is encrypted by the VPN. This is more like if I'm talking to this web server with it over HTTPS, these communications between my two things are encrypted. But some other communication with another website might not be encrypted.
Yeah.
A VPN says everything I'm doing through this computer is now encrypted. So it's like this on steroids.
Should you be concerned if a website does not allow you to connect to it VPN?
No, because some websites might, for various reasons, specifically be like, we're not allowing anonymous traffic to connect to our website because we don't want anonymous visitors. And
We want the
that's-
data.
So there might be very legitimate reasons why they might not, or it just could be like some networking
So there's,
configuration on their end that is broken.
so it could be bad people wanting to do things on a public network, or
It could be a lot of things.
Yes, that's a huge.
That's just so many variables there.
Yeah, because like a common use case for VPNs is like hiding where you are.
Yeah.
To like watch sports games, like nothing
Yes.
too crazy. Like Tampa Bay Lightnings are blacked out from local sports
If
channels.
Netflix detects that
Yeah.
you're connecting via VPN, they're going to be like,
Yeah,
no, because we have licensing deals with our partners, and this content is only licensed in the US.
I ran into that. I went over to Italy and they wouldn't let me. Netflix kicked me off
yeah.
because I had a VPN.
So
Because they have a European version of
Yeah,
Exactly.
Different movies and everything.
So that's why a VPN is like SSL on steroids. It's a very secure connection, but it does a lot of, it hinders features along the way. Chris, you had a question? Okay. So yeah, so now we have the 2 tokens stored in our local storage. We know that that's only exists on my computer. So now that I know that I'm logged in, over here, I'm gonna get rid of this, don't save. Over here now, we say that I'm now at /home, so I'm now over on my home page. So the home page is what was here before. This is where we're handling everything that's going on. I probably could have refactored this more into more component-based, just kind of asterisk there, but here we are. So now down here, don't need that anymore. Inside of my state, I put a is logged in flag there, which is set inside of my component did mount. So what this is doing, this is looking at the auth class that I had, asking it, hey, am I authenticated? If I'm authenticated, then go get my latest, which I modified the get latest. I'm also doing auth.get profile. What this is doing, this is going up to the OAuth servers and actually getting me a profile, and then I'm putting it into state. So let's kind of unwind this a little bit. Let's check out, let's start with the top. How am I checking whether I'm is authenticated or not? So I'm looking at the local storage, looking at when it's expired, and doing a little bit of math there. That's all I'm doing. Because remember, whenever we stored it, expires, that's a timestamp. It's saying it expires at this time. And what we're doing, we're just saying, hey, is it expired yet? And that's it.
Or are you reinstantiating Auth in one page?
It's a new component. So it's a different component. So this is only active inside, this is only available inside of this component because we're exporting it.
What I'm saying is, in app, you instantiated Auth. So why can't you pass Auth as a
You
prop?
can't. There's two different approaches.
Okay.
One is to, in each component that needs it, create a new instance of auth.
Mhm.
The other way is to create one instance of it as a singleton and then pass that around everywhere. One is you're doing this, creating a new instance. The other one is slightly more complicated because you have to pass it around everywhere. So which one is better? It's class half full, class half empty.
Yeah.
6 of one, half dozen the other.
But it knows that it's the same instance
It's not the same
It's a
instance.
new instance.
with
But-
the same information.
Yes, because it's stored in local storage.
Yes.
Okay, so during the homepage, can you go to, if you go to a different page, it still needs, you have to reinstantiate it there?
Yes.
For every component? that you
Every
have?
component that uses any sort of authentication stuff. So like the login, the logout, the is authenticated, the Git profile, anything that does that, you need to reinstantiate.
Let's say if your whole page, which is 10 different pages, 10 different components, all of them have to
At a certain size, it might be worth looking at
be together.
passing it around because you're probably passing around other things as well at that size.
This is where I think you could inject it as a prop in your app component. And then pass it down.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they do it in the boilerplate for the Auth0.
Okay.
Another way would be like
Yeah.
if you had MobX, just make
And
it
say, yeah,
available as
just-
a property on MobX. Another way is like using what is it called in React? The contexts. You could use contexts. You could use a what do you call it? Component. You could use a real singleton and just in your auth.js
Mm-hmm.
at the end say export new auth.
Yeah.
And then just export the one instance, that a file gets read once, it exports one instance. And then when you import auth from everywhere, you're importing the instance. So that works.
Yeah.
There's people who will tell you that that's bad. Whatever. There's different ways to do it. Different people have different opinions on which is better.
If you wanted to segment what a user has access to in your application, so one user can have access to 3 and the other one to 1, would this be a way of doing it, or would that
Yeah.
be in the as you register it in the OAuth as to what, who, what, and where?
That would be you'd be registering inside of OAuth because that's getting down into now role permissions and kind of who can see what. What that looks like is over here inside of this access token. If we decrypt it, in the scope, there's also another property would appear here called I believe it's called roles. And actually, you can designate like, oh, you're a student role, you're a teacher role, you're an administrator role, and you can only see certain pages. That's kind of like the next level of everything. But yes, you can.
Sorry, so many questions.
No,
There's a lot.
Oh yeah,
There's a lot.
I expect a lot of questions. There's a lot going on here. So yeah, so after we're doing that, we're getting the latest, and we're also setting the profile. So I made one change to get latest. And that is, I added the headers. Still going back to the same URL, still going back to localhost 5000. We added an authorization header. This should look vaguely familiar from Friday or from Thursday.
We did it, just Postman.
Yeah, we did in just Postman, but here we're doing it in now JavaScript. And to get the access token, we're literally just going to local storage and getting that token.
Can we just peek at the back end real quick?
You're very curious, aren't you?
Very.
You're super curious. Just a peek, because I know we're in a mixed audience right now. Locations. authorized tag is still there. There's a function that pulls out the user ID from the token.
Okay, we'll get there.
Yeah.
Just wanted to see what it would look like.
Mm-hmm. So, but that's the only difference. So all that's saying is, hey, go to my API, grab my locations, and actually grab the locations for this user. So we can use that to indirectly identify the user. And this get profile is heading out to the auth server and storing the profile of the current user inside of state. So let's see what that looks like. I come over to my React. Here's my state. I have auth, login true, profile. And there we go. So that's where I'm pulling out the name for the welcome mark message. I can also pull out the last name. I can pull out the profile picture. I got my ID. I got a whole bunch of stuff there. And this is everything that I did and that I allowed my application to see inside of that OAuth window. So I said, hey Google, or me being my application, hey Google, I want to know the profile information for Mark Dewey. Can I have that? And Google will go through and they'll ask me, like, yeah, I allow it. And then it'll return to me this information. Then I'm just kind of storing it in the state so I can use it later. Yeah. So after that, since now all the complexities, it's boiled down to now I have a tokens in storage, as well as in state I have the current user. Down here inside my render, I can go, hey, if I'm logged in, show me the welcome message. I'm going to the state and getting the person's given name, the first name. And I'm adding a button to log out with. And then I'm injecting that right into my render. This is a little differently because here we actually set up logic to say, hey, if it's logged in, show this button. I could do, if they're not logged in, show a logged in button as well, a login button as well. But really, if they're here, they should probably be logged in anyways, and that should be handled someplace else, which I'd love to get to and do together. But that's if we don't have questions.
What's the benefit of storing is logged in state if you can just say auth dot is whatever the function is authorized, I think.
Yeah.
So in this case, you would maybe have one top level component that has that state, and it could pass it down as props, and to all its other components.
Yep.
Also, by putting it in state, you trigger the page to re-render when the value changes.
Sure.
Yep. It's the same value of putting anything in state. Is I can pass it to props, and now I'm like listening for stuff for it to change. So ideally, this app is kind of big with a lot of stuff here. It should be parsed out into components. And those components should be dumb enough to not need the authentication stuff. We should just be able to pass it values. How are we feeling so far?
One more thing I noticed. When you set state up, right there, it says auth and it says profile.
Yes.
Is that shorthand?
Yes, that's a shorthand. So all that's saying is, do you ever see this? Like, profile equals profile? Or like, the key equals the value and it's the exact same name. And you're like, key : value, but it's the exact same variable. That practice was so common inside of JavaScript that they created a shorthand that says, hey, just say profile, and we'll create a new key on that object called profile with that value.
I use the hell out of that.
Me too. That's super awesome for debugging statements. I think a few have actually seen me do it before. Where you can do like, hey, console.log error profile.
Is that a React thing?
No, that's a JavaScript thing. And it'll print out to me an object to the console with those two values, with those two keys. So I can directly see what the value of those variables are. But it's super common and super useful. So yes, great
That's
question.
a ES 2015 feature
Mm-hmm.
called, what is that one called? It's the opposite of destructuring. It's, no,
Yeah, what is that?
there's a term.
It's a very fancy term.
Yeah. I will tell you all, we're back in about 15 seconds.
All right. Yeah. So great question. Any other thoughts before we continue?
Your reason it as JSX.
Oh, yeah. So React files can be either JS files or .jsx files. In this case, .jsx gives the IntelliSense a bit more of a nudge to what's going on. So you get some HTML help here as well.
So that's optional.
It's optional. So you can keep it as JS files. That's totally fine. But you know how like in JS files, the IntelliSense doesn't really know how to handle the HTML sections. It doesn't say it's wrong, but it sure doesn't help. If you do a .js, it's saying VS Code, hey, there's going to be some JSX syntaxing, some of the HTML syntax in here. Help me out a little bit.
And you can use that in Vue and React.
Vue, since Vue has a .vue, they're their own syntax, that problem does not exist.
React more.
What?
Just more React friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Because
it's very helpful. So now that we've done that, we see down here that we have our logout button here. So let's kind of unwind to see what this is doing. It's calling the logout function on the auth class because we wanted everything to be encapsulated together. And all the logout is doing, clearing the storage and redirecting you to the home page. Because remember, your session is stored inside of local storage. So as long as you have that thing inside local storage, you are signed in and authenticated. Until it expires.
Are you using, on your app, are you using browser router or router?
Router.
Why?
The
2018.
the real reason is that I got an error message say I should use it because I was using the render.
Because that's what I did. That's what I got an error for that too.
Yeah. The reason, as Jason points out, 2018. Is there a real reason behind that?
So there's a couple different methods that you can use. The old trick before we had the browser history API commonplace was to use the hash mark in URLs, which is called the, it's not the anchor, it is called the, well that's what using it as a router is called. It's the, what is that bit of the URL called? It's the, it's called the fragment identifier. That's what that little pound, anything after the pound sign is in the URL there. Old-fashioned wise, it was meant for linking around in the same page. So what happened is you could click on a link, like if I'm on like dogs.html, and there was a link that just linked to pound Labradors. And there was another link that linked to pound Chihuahuas. I could click on one of those links and it would just scroll me to that part of the same page without triggering a browser refresh. But it also changed the URL up in the address bar and the back and forwards buttons worked. This has been this way since the 90s, right? That's how you could link around inside of a single page. JavaScript folks figured out at some point, hey, cool, we can make our single page JavaScript app have multiple pages, and we render which one they're on based on that fragment identifier. So if they're on Chihuahuas, I render only the Chihuahuas. If they change it to Labradors, then I wipe all that away and render the Labradors, right? And I can manipulate that piece of the JavaScript, and it doesn't cause the browser to refresh. And there's no new technology involved here. This has been the way web browsers have worked since the dawn of web browsers. At a certain point in browser development, we got access, specifically as part of HTML5, we got access to the APIs that we talked about that let you manipulate the browser's history directly. So I can change what's in the address bar now. I can push new values onto the history, and I can replace them. So now I don't need to rely on this hack of manipulating the fragment identifier, the little hash part of the URL. I can just change the URL in the browser. And that's what React Router wants you to do now by default, because every browser supports this now. The hash thing is really just a fallback. That answer that question, maybe?
Yeah. All right.
Oh, and it's just called object literal property value shorthand.
That's it.
Yeah.
There's no fancy name for
No
it.
fancy name.
It's so boring.
Yeah.
I'm like disappointed now.
Yeah. Sorry.
So we did logging in, we did logging out. We saw kind of what's going on there. The only other big change that there was on the client side, at least, was that every time now we head back to our server, like in our check-in again, and as well as our delete, we see that we're not only passing what was there, but we're also passing back the bearer tokens. That's it. Nothing else. How are we feeling? What are our comments? I know it's a lot.
How are we gonna do this on Vue?
And so in Vue, like a lot of it's the same.
Y'all are stuck on Vue, huh?
Projects are.
I believe a few of their final projects are in Vue.
Yeah. What happened?
Dude, Vue
It's a
is
new thing.
awesome.
I mean, it is awesome.
There is definitely.
Don't
Auth0
discriminate.
walks you through all this.
Auth0 does walk through this. That's part of your homework today. Is
That's what I thought.
Like all this code is, well, not this code because he wrote that stuff, but there's the boilerplate stuff is Auth0 gives you.
I say I'm going to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit. This file is copy and pasted from their documentation. I did not write any of this.
I have my own versions.
I was like,
Different opinions in it.
I would go in and change a few of these if this for like something real.
Isn't that the point though, so you don't have to write all that?
Yeah, but now like think of this as kind of like the scaffolding. This gets me 80% of the way or 90% of the way there. I can go in now and tweak this because tweaking out 10 lines of code is a lot easier than writing this from scratch.
They have like a button that says which framework are you using, React, Vue, whatever.
Where did you get this template from?
It'll be in the homework.
Auth0.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Because for tonight's homework, you'll be setting up a client-side application that talks to React.
On the Stack Overflow? Or on your final
That's
project?
adventure code. This is just isolated by itself.
So just create a little asset.
And are there any other thoughts, final questions, comments? Feeling good? Feeling great? Feeling good?
What just happened?
It is a lot, but a lot of the complexity is handled someplace else.
That, and I liked how like last week you showed us how to manually do a lot of that, and then today was sort of showing us how to
building up on
that.
One more question.
Yeah.
I've seen the double ampersand used other than as a conditional operator in the HTML.
Yeah. Oh, so like rendering out stuff?
What does that do?
That's a cool trick.
That is a very cool trick. So it all hinges on the fact that double ampersand for and doesn't return, it returns the second value of the parameter. So-
Or and all of those, they don't return true or false. What they return is the last thing.
Yeah, so if we had
Because
I
should get
A and B and A
We went over this.
and B,
What is that, double ampersand?
that's double ampersand.
Oh.
So like this will return the first truthy value. So we can use this to kind of set like configuration values and stuff like that. So if A is true, this is going to actually return A, not so much true. Same. If A is false and B is true, it's going to return B.
But since A is true and it returns A, it's true.
Yeah, so let's think of A and B there as A is true, B is false, right? So in that statement evaluates to true, right? Because A is true. In A and B, that statement evaluates to B. If it's, yeah, well, actually it would return, A would be true, and then B would be false, and it would return false. Or nil. What if it was like,
If A is true and B is false,
yes,
I believe it returns false.
yes, but not because B is false. Right?
Is it
Because what
possible?
if B
Yeah.
was 0?
Does it
It
just
wouldn't
return?
return 0. It wouldn't return, well, it would return what B was.
Yeah, I say it just returns what B is.
Yeah, you're
So,
right. Okay.
This will always return what B is.
Yeah.
So what you can, so with that knowledge, saying that, hey, if I have my AND statement, as long as this is some truthy value, it's now going to return whatever's here, as long as it's a truthy value as well. So
Well,
what?
No,
But
period.
period. Yeah.
Yes, it could be truthy or it
I
could
mean,
be
yeah.
false.
Yeah. That's,
So the side effect here of these two things both get used commonly for their side effect. The side effect of A or B is that B never even gets evaluated if A is false. It short circuits it, yeah. So you could, sorry, not if A is false, if A is true. If A is true, B gets ignored. So you can use this now to cache things, which is an interesting way to write code. Is to say like, this thing is A or B. Or like you could say like A equals A or B. Because maybe B is some expensive calculation. And if I've already calculated it, then I don't need to evaluate it again, so A is A. But if A isn't anything yet, then A is equal to B. Next time that bit of code runs, A is something. So it's not even going to calculate B, it's just going to assign it to itself again. Right, so it's a weird little trick, but you're going to see it a lot.
So is it default? Basically, that's giving default. So
It's-
if it's
that's-
not A,
it gets exactly used in
Yeah.
that case a lot.
And
And that's the
remember,
side
I
effect of
code like this is what I used to set like default values. So if I'd like, let n equals person.name or the string friend.
Yes.
If person.name existed, it's going to be their name. But if they didn't have a name, it's going to their name and it's going to be their friend instead.
Yep.
So these use tools like setting default values.
Yep.
That's the nice side effect of this.
and then and. So
And
if
that's-
you don't understand, what would that do?
It reads like if A, then B.
Yeah.
Right? Because so the way JSX works do any of you all remember how JSX tags actually get converted into JavaScript? We talked about this a little bit over on the other side, but I don't think we talked about it during the 4 weeks of React.
Nope.
So when you write a JSX tag, and you've got the angle brackets, what you're essentially saying is, I'll write the equivalent here. So I've got a JSX component called home, and it has, I'm not ready for that yet. It has a prop called foo, whose value is blah, okay? And inside my home component, I've got, some text like, hey, right? That's some JSX code. This gets, can I erase the left side?
Yes.
The equivalent of this, when the JSX parser parses this, it just turns this into plain JavaScript. In Create React app case, when you do a yarn build, the outputted JavaScript doesn't have any JSX in it. What it's going to turn this into is a call to react.create component. And it's going to take 3 arguments. I'm going to write them out line by line here, but that's the open parenthesis and end of the parenthesis. The first argument is home. That's the component we're creating, right? The second argument is an object, foo bar, So the key values to this object are the props. The third argument is the children, in which case was just the string hey, but if this was a hey component, this instead of being the string hey would be another call to react.createComponent hey, right? With two empty nil and nil because it has no props and no children, right? So when you write out your big JSX, all your tags, what that's really being converted into is react.createComponent app, any props that the app has, and then passed as an argument the next child that component has. That's why your components, when they render, have to return one thing, because that one thing is this thing that gets passed to the next thing. So as your components nest each other and have children, it just gets turned into this big chain of react.createComponent, and the third argument is another call to react.createComponent, and so on and so on. That's why when you use the curly braces in your JSX to like write a value here, right, like foo plus 1, this would just get turned into like evaluate this, and then like add the string, right, 2, maybe, I don't know, whatever it evaluates that. But that's why I can't do if-else stuff here. Because when you think about this getting turned into JavaScript, in the middle of a list of, because remember, these are just arguments to this function. You can't just write an if-else statement in here, right? The code that needs to go here needs to be valid JavaScript that you could pass as an argument to another function. And I can't write if-else in there. That would be broken JavaScript. So that's why you can't use if-else. But what I can do is like a ternary statement, right? Because you could have a call to function and I could say foo question mark A colon B, right? We remember ternaries, right? The question mark and the colon basically says if this then else. Or we can say foo and B, right? Which is what Mark did in wherever it was you asked about it. So you could put this over here in curly brackets because that's a valid thing as a single statement. Because an if-else is not one statement, it's a bunch of statements, right? But in here you can just have one statement. So that's the reason in JSX you can't write if-else, and because of that we use the other little shorthands like in the curly brackets and then saying something and thing, because then just if it's not true, the right side will never render, and that thing will be rendered. That make sense?
Class names? Where do those go?
Is a class name? It would just be a prop.
Okay.
To here. And React knows that if you specify a lowercase tag here, because when you say home, it's going to look for the home class that you've imported. That's why you imported home, right? But if it's not an uppercase class name, and it's just lowercase, it's like, oh, you must mean for me to actually render a DOM element here, and it goes and handles that on its own. And class name is just a prop to that. Questions there? There's a long answer to that, but that's exactly why we do that. That's like when you write the curly braces, the limitation you have on what you can write in the curly braces in JSX is because of how the JSX code just translates to straight JavaScript function calls. And all of that code is just arguments to other functions. So I think in Razor and in ERB for the Ruby students, that's a different templating language that you can use if-else stuff in it.
Yep.
Because it gets evaluated in a different way. But because of the way JSX gets evaluated, you have limitations.
Same with Vue. Their templating stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It is evaluated differently. So you can use if statements inside of it as well.
That's cool. But as we see with
Yeah.
you don't need if-else statements. Or you could just put that if-else statement inside of a function and just put the function here.
Mhm.
And that's totally valid.
Yeah.
And because you can pass a function call to a function. It's just that that syntax can't directly get translated into anything in the conversion of JSX.
So yeah.
Back in the day when React first dropped,
Yeah.
a lot of people looked at JSX and they were like, nope, not gonna do it. I am not gonna write HTML in my JavaScript. I've learned for the last 20 years as a web developer that that's bad. That those are separate concerns that deserve to be in separate places. And people, because they had the paradigms they were used to in their head. And there's really good reason why you don't mix the behavior and the presentation like that. React is a totally different paradigm, not one that people were used to thinking in. One that now to us totally makes sense. Once we've got our heads around it for experienced developers and for new people coming in, you're like, okay, cool, this is cool, but it's completely unlike the way we did things before.
Yeah.
So a lot of people took them some time to get used to the JSX syntax. There were people who were using React because they heard React was good, so they should use React, but they hated JSX, so they would literally write their components. Their render functions would just return react.createComponent nested, react.createComponent h1, and then nil for the props, and the content was the text that goes inside h1, and so on. And it would be like, what?
That's like worse than document.createElement. Like
Yes. Yeah, imagine
so
writing a whole HTML page using JavaScript and saying react.createElement or
document.create.
document.createElement over and over again. That's the equivalent of react.createComponent. And people were doing that, and then eventually figured out, no, I'm just gonna write JSX because it's much better.
Yeah, so much better.
Turns out those guys who made React did know what they were doing.
So yeah, homework will be out by the end of lunch. We already know what it is. So.
Lunch.
See y'all for review at 2, except for the Ruby folks. Have fun.
No.
Including